Hello, and today at this episode is all about MSP ecosystem, and we talk about how is it changing and what suppliers need to do if they want to stay relevant and create value beyond just filling requisitions. So, Kelly, I'm going to bombard you with questions here today.
I'm ready, and thanks for having me back.
Sure. What is shifting in the MSP landscape right now, and why does that matter for suppliers?
Yeah. Yeah, our whole industry is undergoing tremendous change right now, as we know, very, very, very quickly. What's changing for the MSPs is that they, like everybody else in the industry, are scrambling to remain relevant. Okay. What MSPs were brought in to do 20, 30 years ago is very different from what companies actually need these days. And between direct sourcing and talent platforms and automation and the push towards SOW, which is typically, 10x the size of contingent labor. MSPs are under a lot of pressure to deliver more value and typically with less cost and less friction. And as I said, with that SOW business in particular, as you know, that revenue opportunity is huge. And so that means that suppliers who just show up to fill recs, to submit talent and fill recs, are becoming easier and easier to replace. So, my belief is that they are evolving. They're not when it comes to the suppliers, MSPs aren't intentionally just trying to eliminate suppliers. Although the market's been very slow for the last few years. So we have seen tremendous optimization as our customers' volume has slowed down. The MSP supply chains have absolutely gotten shorter. So if you are a supplier that was not participating, you may find yourself exited from those programs. But, those MSPs that are out there are really trying to eliminate a lot of noise and inefficiency. They're trying to reestablish themselves as important in this ecosystem. And for suppliers to remain relevant, now this starts to look a little different, and it's how we contribute beyond just that transactional, submittal and filling of orders.
No, that's interesting. I mean, honestly, you're right. MSPs have evolved so much over the last 20 years, and suppliers need to kind of not stick with what they knew from 20 years ago, right? Like you need to evolve just as much.
Absolutely.
So, where are suppliers becoming interchangeable or irrelevant? And what behaviors are accelerating that trend?
Yeah. You know, If and I said this a moment ago, if suppliers are just bringing bodies to the equation, then they're going to become irrelevant. If your entire value lives inside of the VMS portal, then you are very easy to replace, particularly as AI and platforms and other things get more and more dominant in our industry. So when suppliers don't show up with insight for the MSP and the customer, recognizing patterns within the program that can be helpful, proactively thinking where they're not sharing knowledge and insights. They are just starting to look very identical on paper to other suppliers. And that becomes very, very dangerous. If you may think that you don't have that much to offer, but if you are a supplier and you're an expert in your space, whether that's a vertical or a geography or whatever the case may be, bringing that knowledge and insight to the program and helping that end customer grow the size of the program, reduce cost, reduce risk, improve the efficiency, whatever the case may be. Those are the things that are really, really valuable. And we'll talk about that, I think, in a little bit. But you can become interchangeable very quickly, if you aren't thinking differently about how you add value, and as you said, if you're treating these programs the same way that you might have 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, you really hit, I think, on a key element that broaches both areas, MSPs and SOW, but it's understanding your USPs, your unique selling points, right? It's like you being able to articulate why pick me and why am I better than, who's than A or B, for example, and bringing that to the table. So that's very, very valuable. How should suppliers think about the rise of direct sourcing, as you alluded to earlier, and platforms inside MSP programs? And where do they still add value?
Yeah, those things become very, very tricky. I'm not going to lie. Suppliers think of direct sourcing and platforms as a threat, and they are a threat. And as I said, they're a threat to MSPs as well. And so these are some things that really we just weren't talking about several years ago. To show up in the same way, as I said, to deliver talent in the same manner as you did before, really just gives more power to those direct sourcing models and those platforms and minimizes the value that a supplier brings to the equation. And so suppliers that are stepping back and they're thinking more thoroughly through, how can I add value at a very different level? How do I help this customer solve problems that they have or that they may not even realize they have? How do I spot problems? Those are things that direct sourcing isn't going to be able to do. Those are things that platforms may not be able to do. Those things are going to add cost efficiency and possibly fill efficiency, but they can't add the unique value that a supplier can. And so I think it becomes even more important to think really creatively and step back from how we've always done things and bring something very, very different to the table, so that we don't get caught in that same old way of being positioned that we might have before.
Right. No, that's great. And it kind of ties into that whole USP, right? Like you understanding your unique selling point and therefore being able to counter it.
Yeah,
All right. So one of my most favorite topics, and as a solutions provider, this was a great way for me to get around MSPs is by doing SOWs. Well, lo and behold, the MSPs are all wisened up, and we're seeing more MSPs and enterprise buyers pushing toward SOW and outcome based models. So, how does that impact traditional staffing suppliers? And what does it signal about where the market is headed?
Yeah. It is a spectrum, and I said this a while ago. I think, last year, SIA indicated that, SOW business was 10 times that of contingent in terms of revenue opportunity, so it's huge. So, of course, MSPs are chasing it. Um, the opportunity is massive, but what it says when you're a supplier is it becomes very easy to either try to chase everything, and you've alluded to this when we've talked about SOW, but not do it well. I think you've got to strike that balance between where am I going to be the most successful? Sometimes that might be that I need to step outside of our comfort zone and invest in additional solutions. We might need to get into the SOW space in a very, very specific way that we know we can win. And it also might mean the discipline of saying no and saying, we're not going to be successful there. So we're going to in even harder. We're going to invest in really driving that differentiation and that value prop that we can bring on one side of the equation. So I think suppliers are at a point where they have to continue to choose if they want to reinvent themselves or if they want to stay on the course that they're on. And those are different answers for different companies. There is no one perfect answer. If there was, I would be an extraordinarily wealthy woman and I probably wouldn't be doing this podcast with you. I'd have all the answers, right? But I think it's a decision point. I think we need to take these things really seriously and watch the environment right now and make sure that we're responding.
Exactly, exactly. And it's maintaining that fluid approach, right? Like and making sure that you can respond effectively. Let me ask if suppliers want to truly change the game inside MSPs, what has to change in the relationship itself, not just the contractor pricing? And we've talked a little bit about relationships, I know in episode 2, I believe. But tell me in a nutshell what you think would have to really change.
I think the bottom line answer is suppliers need to move from a vendor posture to a partner posture. And that's easier said than done. And listen, there are really good MSPs out there, and there are MSPs that I don't love. And I will all the money and wine in the world is not gonna get me to confess that, at least not out loud. But there are some that are just really never going to embrace that a supplier can be a true partner. Um, I could talk for hours and hours about how you figure out which programs those are and how you potentially exit them because there are just programs and partners that you're not going to be successful in. But where you can, and there are many of them where you can, showing up as a partner looks very different. As I said before, this comes with knowing that customer. You have a shared customer with the MSP program, right? Understanding that end customer in depth, showing up with ideas, with data and perspectives, not just for waiting for requisitions to happen, not just waiting for the MSP to, to give you more opportunities or not. The relationship is going to change when the MSP and the end customer start to see you and your company as someone who helps them think differently, and solve problems and potentially problems they didn't realize they had, rather than just reacting to problems. So that can look like a lot of things. That can be co-selling. That can be bringing, the MSPs themselves. We have to remember, we get grumpy about that MSP fee, and I get it, but that is the revenue stream for the MSP. And so they are incentivized by that spend under management growing, right? And so if you can come to an MSP and say, hey, I understand and know ways that we can help actually grow the program, that puts money in the MSP's pocket. So you're already getting their attention there, right? And bringing everything that you know as a supplier in your space and about that customer to the table, and sharing that and looking for ways to drive that spend in the program. Those are things that are truly going to be differentiators.
Yeah, and you it's almost like using the fee to help you as opposed to work against it, which I think is a valuable message to everyone listening. Let me wrap up with this last question here. If suppliers had to make one mindset shift to stay relevant as MSPs continue to evolve, what would it be?
Oh, goodness. I think what they will be doing is thinking about how to be more intentional, not necessarily being a generalist. They're going to understand where they add value. There are 25,000 staffing firms in North America, and I would say 24,900 of them think that the value that they bring is putting a talent in a company in a seat, right? And so the ones that really understand how they can add value and how they can differentiate are going to win. But suppliers with those winning approaches that are thinking about it a little bit differently, that are understanding what partnership really looks like, that are understanding where they can be successful, that have the discipline to stay away from those areas that they can't be successful, and to shine a light within their organization and have visibility and measures to what they are expecting from teams, what they want to grow, and making everybody part of that joint strategy. I think those are the things that, 5 years from now, a winning supplier is going to look back and say, these are the things that we implemented and that we were really loyal to that paid off for us.
Right. And again, I think it ties in so nicely to everything we've been talking about, the unique selling points, right? Like really putting your arms around it and really understanding those so that you can better represent yourself to the MSPs and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and it's so much about, and we've alluded to this before, we need to stop asking ourselves as suppliers, how do we protect the old model? How do we protect the way that we used to do things? And how do we really start asking ourselves, how are we going to stay relevant? The market's moving, whether we like it or not. And to remain relevant is really, it's not a guarantee. It's going to be a choice.
So as we've learned today, key takeaways, MSPs is not just a channel, right? It's a performance sport and you need to be focused on that performance side of things. Our final episode is next, and that is the summary, the sequencing, the practical, what do we do Monday type of checklist. We'll also share where to find us and how to stay connected.